At the southern end of the Gazala Line stood a place that seemed almost designed to be forgotten. Bir Hakeim was not a great city, not a famous port, and not a natural fortress that dominated the desert by height or beauty. It was a remote position in the Libyan waste, surrounded by open ground, dust, heat, mines, wire, and the immense silence of the desert. Yet in the spring of 1942, this isolated box became one of the most important points in the entire North African campaign. The Free French garrison there gave the Gazala Line its southern anchor, and when Rommel came around that flank, Bir Hakeim turned from a lonely outpost into a problem he could not ignore.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
The men defending Bir Hakeim carried more than rifles, guns, and supplies into the position. They carried the complicated burden of France's defeat in 1940, exile, political division, and the determination to prove that France had not left the war. The garrison belonged to the Free French, commanded by General Marie-Pierre Koenig, and it included troops from different backgrounds, colonies, services, and experiences of war. Some had escaped defeat in Europe, while others came from the wider French Empire and from formations that had chosen to continue the fight. That mixture gave the position a significance far beyond its size. Bir Hakeim was a military outpost, but it was also a statement of national survival.
The Gazala Line depended on Bir Hakeim because the British defensive system needed a firm southern end. If the coast near Gazala marked one end of the position, Bir Hakeim marked the other, deep in the desert, where a mobile army might try to turn the flank. A defensive line in open country is always vulnerable at its edges, because an attacker does not have to break through the strongest point if he can move around it. Bir Hakeim helped deny Rommel an easy swing around the British position. It did not seal the desert completely, because nothing could truly seal such a vast space, but it forced any Axis movement in the south to account for a defended point that could threaten supply routes, movement corridors, and timing.
The word box can make the position sound tidy, almost geometric, but a desert box was a hard and uncomfortable fighting system. It was built from minefields, wire, trenches, weapon pits, gun positions, command posts, dumps, and routes marked across ground that could become confusing in darkness or dust. The defenders had to prepare to fight in every direction, because a bypassed box might suddenly find the enemy behind it as well as in front of it. Anti-tank guns had to be sighted carefully, artillery had to be protected, infantry positions had to support one another, and engineers had to make the surrounding ground dangerous to cross. A box was not strong because it had a name on a map. It was strong only if its defenders had prepared it well and could keep fighting when isolated. Bir Hakeim's remoteness gave it a strange emotional power. Out there, the men were at the end of the line, in a very literal sense. To the north lay the rest of the Gazala defenses, the road to Tobruk and the larger British system. To the south and east lay open desert, where maneuver could dissolve ordinary ideas of front and rear. The garrison understood that if Rommel moved around the flank, they might be surrounded or left to fight without immediate relief. This was not the same as holding a village with nearby reserves behind it. It was a position where endurance, discipline, and preparation had to compensate for distance.
The defenders were not simply waiting to be attacked. They were part of the larger plan for the Gazala position. Their job was to hold, to observe, to resist Axis pressure, and to complicate any attempt to turn the line from the south. That meant their value could not be measured only by how much ground they physically occupied. If Bir Hakeim delayed Axis columns, forced them to divert troops and guns, disrupted supply movement, or caused Rommel to spend time he hoped to save, then the garrison would influence the whole campaign. In desert warfare, delay could be a weapon, A day lost at the wrong moment could change where armored formations arrived, when fuel reached them, and whether an offensive kept its balance.
The Free French position also illustrates a larger truth about armored warfare. Tanks do not operate in an empty arena. Rommel's armored sweep around the Gazala Line depended on movement, surprise, and the ability to keep his columns supplied once they had passed behind British positions. A stubborn defensive box on the flank could interfere with all of that. Mines could slow vehicles, anti-tank guns could punish careless attacks, artillery could disrupt assembly areas, and patrols could create uncertainty about what routes were safe. Even if tanks were the most visible symbol of the campaign, infantry and engineers inside a fixed position could shape where tanks moved and how quickly an armored plan unfolded. The Italian Ariete Armored Division and other Axis forces would soon find that Bir Hakeim was not a decorative marker at the bottom of the British line. It was defended by troops who had prepared seriously and who understood what their stand meant. Axis commanders expected the southern movement to create surprise and dislocation, and in many ways it did. But the presence of a strong point at Bir Hakeim meant that Rommel could not simply treat the southern flank as empty space. The box became an irritant, then an obstacle, and eventually a symbol. It forced the Axis to choose between bypassing a danger in their rear or spending strength to reduce it. For Koenig and his men, the military problem was inseparable from morale. They were fighting under the Free French banner at a time when the future of France remained uncertain and painful. Their stand would not restore France by itself, and they knew they were only one garrison in a much larger war. But war often gives symbolic weight to places that had little before the fighting began. At Bir Hakeim, resistance became proof of continued agency. The defenders could not control the whole battle of Gazala, but they could control how firmly they held their ground, how costly they made the position, and how long they denied Rommel the freedom he wanted. The desert made that defiance harder with every hour. Heat wore down bodies, dust damaged weapons and engines, and water became a constant measure of survival. Bombardment and air attack could make the position feel smaller and more exposed, because there were few places in the desert where men could truly disappear from observation and fire. Supply was always a concern, and once a box was under pressure, bringing in ammunition, food, medical help, and water became increasingly dangerous. The defenders had to endure not only combat, but the knowledge that isolation could turn every shortage into a crisis. In such conditions, endurance was not passive, it was an active form of combat power. The British command also needed Bir Hakeim to hold, because the wider Gazala system depended on time. If Rommel's southern hook moved too quickly, British armored reserves would have less chance to react, and the line could be turned before commanders fully understood the threat. If Bir Hakeim held long enough, it could slow the rhythm of the Axis plan and help create opportunities for counterattack elsewhere. That did not mean the rest of the British response would automatically succeed. As the campaign would show, delay only matters if an army uses it well. Still, the garrison at the end of the line gave the Eighth Army something precious in a mobile battle: friction imposed on the enemy's timetable. Bir Hakeim also complicates the idea that Gazala was simply Rommel's masterpiece. Rommel's offensive would become famous for bold movement, but the battle was never a clean sweep across empty sand. It ran into resistance, uncertainty, supply danger, and local stands that mattered. The Free French at Bir Hakeim reminded both sides that a determined defensive position could disrupt even the most aggressive armored maneuver. Their role did not make the Gazala Line invulnerable, and it did not prevent the larger British system from eventually unraveling, but it showed that local courage and tactical preparation could impose real operational consequences,
even when the broader campaign moved toward disaster.
That is why Bir Hakeim belongs near the center of the Gazala story. It was remote, but not irrelevant. It was small compared with the whole desert front, but its resistance shaped timing, morale, and movement far beyond its perimeter. It gave the Free French a battlefield legend and gave the Axis a stubborn obstacle at the very place where speed mattered most. In the larger history of armored warfare, Bir Hakeim teaches that tanks and maneuver are only part of the story. A battlefield can turn on a lonely box at the edge of the map, held by men who understand that their task is not to win the whole war in one place, but to make the enemy pay for every hour he loses there.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.